Ms. Voyles, would you?
She's right here.
Oh. Right there. She's right there.
Right here.
Oh, there you are.
I'll take a cup.
Are you ready?
I'm ready. Go ahead.
All right, would you state your name and where you live, Ms. Voyles?
My name is Susan Voyles, and most people call me Susie.
Okay.
I live in Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is in Fulton County.
Okay. And tell me about your being a poll manager and what you've done as far
Mr.
as.
Smith, I'm going to need for you to, I know she's behind you, but I'm going to need for you to speak into the
I'm sorry.
microphone so that you can be heard
Okay.
online. I'm
Sure,
sorry to
absolutely.
interrupt you, but you may want to start over.
Okay. Ms. Voyles, if you could tell the committee here what your role is as a precinct poll manager and how long you've been doing it, and then kind of get into how you were involved with the recount, et cetera.
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
I have been a manager of a precinct polling location in Sandy Springs for over 20 years. I've mostly been in the same location. When they consolidated polls, however, they asked me to move to another poll. Then when they pared them down, I got to go to SSO2 again, which I thought was a wonderful thing. Anyway, I have never experienced in all my time an election quite like this one. I have never seen such poor handling of not only the machinery, but the chain of custody from the very beginning was so flawed. I went in on Sunday, and that's the typical day that we pick up our things. And all our equipment, our big BMDs, the ballot marking device, is supposed to be put in place.
Could you tell what date that was, please?
Yes, that would have been Sunday, the 1st of November. It's always the Sunday prior. And that Friday prior to that, our ballot marking devices are all supposed to be in the location of our poll. Up to that point, I had no idea that mine were not there. But when I went in on Sunday, I'm to pick up my poll pads, a lot of material, and the poll pads are really an updated version of the numbered list of voters. It's just on an iPad-like device. And it also has a place where I can encode the cards for the voters, the voter access cards. But when I went in, the only thing I received was my telephone. And he's...
Ms. Voyles, I'm sorry. Could you, we've got limited time. Why don't we skip ahead to when you were involved with the recount on November 14th?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
On Saturday, well, I was called the day before on the 13th. Friday the 13th, I was called and asked, could I obtain two of my assistant managers, and would I be willing to go down to perform the audit? I said, yes, I would. Unfortunately, we had to sign up for the entire 5 days, Saturday through Wednesday, and from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. If we could not commit to that time, they did not want our services. So I could, but my other assistant managers could not. I did go down with another manager, and our first box that we finally got close to 10 o'clock in the morning, I believe it was 9:45, because they didn't have enough tables for everybody. They weren't prepared for as many as they asked to come. Our first box that we got was a corrugated cardboard box that was not the size of a typical file box, but it was just like maybe a book box if you were moving. It was bound together with packaging tape, and on the top of that, clear packaging tape, on the top of that was the seal that should be totally pressed down like a sticker from the Secretary of State's office, which should, according to the chain of custody, have the signatures of those who had prepared this box, who had been the last to touch it. Likewise, at the end, that would have been my responsibility once we had gone through the contents to do the same thing, replace it with a new seal with my signature and my partner's signature. We were instructed how we were to do the ballots, and our first batch, our first box, contained 8 batches of at least 100 apiece. One batch did have 110 in it. And as we went through the batches, they were normal absentee ballots, and most of them were pretty worn until we came up to a batch that is, it was, my words were pristine. It was white. It was so white. And this is a typical absentee ballot. You can see how when it comes to you in the mail, how it's got many folds in it. These had no folds. You could see where it should have been folded if it went through a folding machine, or for the voter to figure out easily how to do that. But these did not have that. I was running my hands up, and I said to my seatmate, I said, feel these. They feel different. And when you have felt absentee ballots for as long as I have, yeah, the years are creeping up there, you know the feel of them. You know the feel of a real dollar bill. You know the feel of a play dollar bill, even though it might look genuine. But the thing that really jumped out at us, besides the feel of these ballots, besides there were no folds, was the fact that the first one that was bubbled in had almost a little eclipse of white in the bubble where you would bubble in. And in that ballot, I mean, everything else was right there. But as we began to proceed through, because we had to sort these by Donald J. Trump, Joseph R. Biden, and Joe Jorgensen, and then write-in if we happened to have a write-in. What we began to notice was an overwhelming amount were exactly, not possibly, but exactly the same. So these absentee ballots had no folds in them, yet they were presented as absentee ballots. Even if they'd wound up as a provisional ballot, which is similar in structure, just different type of envelopes, it would have been exactly the same. There would have been folds in them, but these ballots were exactly the same, and there was one in the middle of this stack that all of us at times have pulled something out of a scanner or a copier too soon, and the image is not square on the paper. And that's exactly the way one of these ballots was in this batch. It was also striking to me that rather than having the customary 100 to the batch, it had 110. We found this to be quite an oddity.
Talk about the when you were down there about the organization. Oh, I'm sorry. Talk about the organization when you were down there and you came down there, and on that, I think it was a Sunday morning, you came down there and you thought you were going to be down there all day and they told you to leave.
On the second day, we stayed until about 4:45 on Saturday. We were instructed to come back Sunday morning, which we did. We were very surprised to find no lines. What they had done was not only had poll managers there, Fulton County poll managers, but the previous day had a number of Fulton County employees who were there. Also, the girls behind us, they were librarians, but they were Fulton County librarians. They were there to do this. So on Sunday morning when we went down, it was fairly void of anybody. We were just very surprised. We were instructed to go to our table that we had the day before. People came in after us, including the people at the table behind us. We gave our table number so that we could get our ballots. We waited and we waited. The people behind us got theirs. They had over 3,000 from Sandy Springs precincts. The people in front of us had over 6,000 from another precinct. And when our box came, you know, our eyes were getting kind of big because that was a lot of ballots to get through. When we got ours, we opened up our box, and the Fulton County ballot boxes are like heavy-duty suitcases with padding on the inside and roller carts. We had the young man unseal ours, and then when we opened it, I was kind of aghast. We had one batch of the machine-generated ballots in there from the BMDs, the ballot marking device. There were 60 of them in that batch. They were all from a quality living center, and which is in, I believe, southwest Atlanta. I do know it's South Atlanta. And all we had was 60. And we stayed around, and we asked for another batch, and we waited, and we waited, and we waited. Did not get one. We volunteered to help the other people who had such enormous stacks, and we were told that we were done. So the thing that was also an oddity to us, whether it was the Sunday bunch, I've done this long enough to know the votes are usually fairly even, and this was not the case either with the absentee type ballots or, when you're seeing a stack where 98% of them are for one candidate. Those are overwhelming odds, particularly when you look at the overall vote count.
Okay. Were there other, when we were told to leave, was there anybody else that still left there, still counting?
Oh, yes, this was 10 in the morning, and that's why we volunteered to help the gals behind us and the gals in front of us or anybody else in the room. But we were told to leave. Some other friends of ours, Dr. and Dr. Roll, were told to leave. And so I suggested to my partner that we obey and that we left. And when we were there the night before, there were pallets of ballots that needed to be addressed and counted. And those pallets were non-existent the next day. And to be told we had to block off so much time and miraculously finish by 10 o'clock on Sunday morning and not required for any other service. That was amazing.
No further questions of this witness.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Wells, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for working as a poll manager. As it relates to the ballots that you discovered that were pristine and not folded, I'm assuming as a poll manager, you're familiar with the process of ballot duplication?
Yes, I am. But
or replication?
now, are you speaking if something was flawed and could not go through the scanner? Is that what you're speaking
either
of?
flawed and cannot be read by the scanner, or a UOCAVA ballot that is printed on a home printer overseas and then mailed in, and then is going to be duplicated onto a ballot by poll workers such as yourself?
I certainly am, but if that were the case with these ballots, the markings would not have been identical through 98% of the ballots.
Well, couldn't it be explained, the lack of folding, could that, and the fact that they were more identical, couldn't that be explained by the fact that they were all personally replicated and duplicated with observation by individuals working that same poll?
Well, the probability of that, I would think, is very slight, because why would 98 ballots have that little white eclipse on the very first presidential ballot? Why would all of them be exactly the same? It was very easy to see that a ballot had been replicated many times. One was hand done, the rest had some other marking device, whether it was copied, whether it was scanned,
So your testimony is that they just looked too identical. It's not that, because I understood you to say the fact that they were folded set off alarm, or not folded
Not
set off
folded.
alarms for you, where my more limited understanding of the process is that it makes perfect sense due to the duplication process that not every ballot would be folded? So your testimony is that they looked too similar
My testimony
to
is
have
that,
been properly duplicated?
correct, none of them were folded.
But
None of them, if something had been done, it would look somewhat accordion like this. None of them were like this.
Well, so can you educate me for a second? Because I guess
Sure.
what I'm not understanding is why those would be folded, because my understanding of the duplication process is that they indeed would be pristine and not folded.
Well, you would not have had the score marks in them that, where they should have been folded by, if you're familiar with any type of mailing, you know, whether it's a church bulletin or, you know, your school report cards or whatever it is, they have wonderful folding machines. But they are usually sent by the printer. And I don't think it's the fold so much. It was the feel that drew our attention to how all of these were marked.
So your testimony is it's not so much the fold, it's that they felt differently. Is
Well,
that correct?
that's what drew our attention to it, was the fact that they felt differently. And then as we began to examine the ballots, we saw that they indeed were different. We had already been through 600, 6 batches, which would have been over 600 ballots. And these were much different.
Not explainable by the normal duplication process that
No.
would be done
No.
as a batch. All right, thank you.
Senator Heath?
You mentioned, I think I got this right, you mentioned a box that had 60 ballots in it.
That was the box on Sunday, yes.
I'm over here, I'm
She's over
sorry.
here. He's
I-
right there.
You saw my head bobbling around.
Yeah, I thought you were
I'm
on
sorry.
something more
Yes.
important, so.
No. Nothing more important than what you're asking. So, yes, Sunday there were 60 ballots in our box.
And that box was from Quality,
Quality Living Center, and those were all generated on a ballot marking device, which is looking like a larger iPad. It's the Dominion.
so is Quality, I'm sorry, is that a voting precinct, or is that,
No, sir, it is simply a men's recovery center, and that was very unusual to me also, because most of our senior centers have been trying to get at least one sort of precinct designation or early designation for the 20 years that I've been doing this, and they have not. So to have a 60-person facility,
so is this, Fulton County made mention that they had some
mobile units.
mobile units that they, it seemed to me that they were saying like they were mobile precincts, that if they had a issue at a precinct, they could roll in there with this thing and take over the work there. I had some questions about how you reprogram a precinct from being precinct 1 to be precinct 54, for example, because there would be potentially different ballots on that, like if there were school board or city council or county commission or whatever. Not all precincts have the same ballot, at least in some elections. So I had some questions about that, but are you implying, or is it possible that this was the results of a mobile precinct that rolled into a quality living center and they all came out and voted? Or
I can't say it's not possible. That is a possibility.
I'm trying to understand
But
how
usually-
you knew they came from Quality Living Center.
Because that was on the ballot box. Every batch of ballots that we received told us where they had
But that's
originated.
generally a voting precinct.
No, this is not a voting this is just where those 60 ballots had come from. They took a voting unit there, and I cannot answer whether it was a single BMD or whether it was the unit.
So it could have been the mobile voting unit or mobile precinct. I think Fulton County testified they had 2 of these, but my point is that they sort of, I'm not sure how the level of detail at the elections, but I don't think you can just decide, oh, we'll have a precinct over to Kroger today from noon to 3, and then we'll move over to somewhere else
Well,
later that day. I don't, and furthermore, I mean, I understand having ballots, a group of ballots that came from a precinct, but a group of ballots that came from an address doesn't seem right.
If I might answer your question from another direction, when I finally did receive my poll pads and we were trying to have our first voters vote first thing in the morning, the one thing that we noticed, and I did bring, if you'd like to see, I brought the poll pad. The first thing that came up was the voter didn't belong in that poll, and yet I saw her, her ID and her license address and everything like that, and I thought, well, this is screwy. I looked at it, and our poll pads were actually programmed for Adams Park Library. And so it did show her it gave her directions how to get up to where she was standing physically in front of me. And so then at that point, what was done, since when the text finally came in to remedy this problem, they, with the use of the internet, got a hold of Dominion in Denver, and they were able to reprogram those. But I think on a so that they went for my poll, I think on a different level, and I can't, I'm not even going to speculate on the mobile units.
May I continue? Or? So I thought that I understood that the voting system was separated from the world by an air gap, that they're not connected to the internet. What I thought I heard you say is that you were able to contact Dominion, they were able to fix the problem. That indicates to me that somehow they're able to communicate with the device that you have.
Yes, sir, they were. And to give you an example, the way, I am not a tech person, but the best way I can explain it to you is when something happens with my phone that I have an iPhone, or something happens with my Apple computer where I need additional assistance with that. I call up Apple and I say, this is what's happening. And they say, do I have permission to take over your computer? And of course, I give them the permission to do that because I want it fixed. That was the exact same thing. I had to give them permission to take over my poll pad so that they could reprogram it from Adams Park to SSO2 A and B, which is at West Spalding Drive Elementary.
One final, I think. So as I think through this, there's some protection, should be some protection that keeps me from going to one precinct and voting, and driving over to another precinct and voting. That would seem to require that maybe it's this poll pad, not the actual ballot marking device or the scanner, but the poll pad has to be connected to other poll pads. But so maybe what you're saying is that poll pad, that update on the poll pad is not generating ballots. It's only generating a card that you then take to the ballot marking device to vote. Is that correct? Or?
That is partially correct, sir. We also had with our ballot marking devices at the same time, because of whatever was going wrong, and then we could not encode the cards, they fixed those machines, the ballot marking devices, at the same time. So does that answer your question a little bit more? Yes, they operated remotely on both the ballot marking device and on the poll pads. We also had someone there. We've always been told we cannot take our personal computers or even have our phones there. And we also had someone, I'll see if I can try and explain her position, requested by the ACLU, but she was not with the ACLU. She was an attorney, and she was sworn in as a deputy registrar. And her position, because they were anticipating many, many provisional ballots or absentee ballots coming in where people actually wanted to vote in person, which, by the way, all of those ballots, at the end of the day, if somebody surrenders theirs, they are marked canceled. We tear a portion of that ballot so it cannot go through a scanner. And then they are marked on the machine. But she was always connected to the internet. And we have been told that never, I'm not trying to discredit her. She was doing what she was asked to do, and she was a great deal of help to me personally, because in the past, we had to call up and say, you know, has John Smith returned his absentee ballot, and go through a whole bunch. She could do it almost immediately.
Okay, Senator, I have a couple of questions, and we'll need to move on to Senator Kennedy and then Senator Brass. And I'll get you on the next one. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Voyles, thank you very much for appearing before this committee. Your experiences and the testimony you bring are critical to us understanding and getting to the bottom of what happens and what happened during the course of the election on Election Day. So thank you very much for being here. My question is really just one. With regard to the pristine ballots that you've talked about and answered some other questions on, can you give us an estimate of what the total number of those ballots that you found suspicious for, on whatever basis it was, but the ones that are in the pristine category? Can you tell us about how many of those you think were there?
Yes, I can. In that batch, there were 110, and that was odd. We were told no batch would be over 100. Sometimes we had 99 because there might have been a disqualified ballot, and that was on the tally sheet that we received beforehand. In that particular batch, there were 2 for Donald J. Trump, there was 1 for Joe Jorgensen, and the remainder of the 110 were for Joseph R. Biden.
Okay. I said one question. Can I ask one more,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman? A different question. Were there, other than the experience that you answered questions about for Senator Heath, of ballots that indicated or had some indicia from which they were sourced geographically, some address or something indicating where they came from, did you see anything like that in addition to what you've already described? That is, ballots that had some indicator or some way to trace back or some suggestion of the sourcing of where they came from geographically?
Yes, this first box that we received all indicated that they were from the center that was put up at State Farm Arena. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Susie, for being here. Going back to that pristine batch of 110, did you say you've been doing this poll managing for 21 years? Did I hear that earlier? Or?
You heard over 20 years.
Over 20 years, okay. So in your over 20 years experience, have you ever seen a batch that was completely pristine like this with no folds? Yes or no is fine.
No.
Okay. In your 20-plus years experience doing this, have you ever noticed or seen ballots to where the mark was pretty much the same in every spot? Yes or no will be fine.
No.
Okay.
Senator Cardin. Senator Summers. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. Have any of your colleagues in Georgia, 159 counties, you are the mayor, by the way, have they come forward as you've come forward as telling us these facts that you know to be true about the way these ballots are done? Is anybody else in Georgia, poll workers or the head of the poll, doing that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you able to, Mr. Mayor, will you be able to submit that to this committee of what will happen?
We have, Ray can address himself to this, we have 100 affidavits. The witnesses that we're presenting today are just examples of numerous other witnesses who have the same information or similar information. We didn't think we could take up your time with 100 witnesses.
For instance, we had a witness from Bibb County who saw these same pristine ballots in Bibb County.
If I could clarify one other thing, I don't know if Phil made it.
Mr. Mayor, could you pull the
Microphone.
microphone closer?
Colonel Waldron made it clear in his testimony. One of the problems with Dominion is it has numerous connections to the internet, and in every state in which we've done investigations, Dominion was connected to the internet and would lie about it, and they would say they weren't. I'd have to look through the affidavits here to see if that's the case here, but in at least 3 other states, numerous witnesses saw the internet connections of Dominion, and the Dominion supervisor would say, no, we're not connected to the internet. And Phil has evidence of those communications into the Dominion machine and communications outside, which we can submit to you.
May I add a comment there about the texts and everything? Most of us did not have a technical person within our precinct. We had to wait for one to arrive from Fulton County. So I hear there is a rumor that everybody had a tech, and I talked to Mike Dvorak. I was asking him, and he did not have one in the poll that they managed. I did not have one, and numerous other people had to wait hours for techs to come.
Thank you. Senator Anderson?
Thank you, ma'am, for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to Senator Heath's comments, did I understand that the Dominion's supposed to not be tied to the internet or tied to any type?
That is my understanding. However,
Okay.
it is, and if you look on their own website, and I told you I'm not a real big tech person, but they showed you how to repair things or how to download things.
Now, did I hear you correctly say that you could call them and then they could, over the phone, fix the machine?
We did call them, and they did fix our machine over the phone.
All right. How do you honestly know that you was really talking to somebody from Dominion?
How do I know when I call Georgia
mean,
Power that I'm honestly talking with somebody from Georgia Power?
Right, but I mean,
That's the number that we're given.
Really, we don't even know if you're really talking, you're hoping you are, but you're really not knowing that you're really talking to the right people. I mean, I don't.
Well, that sounds a little more nefarious than I'm
I
giving.
mean, it's a possibility is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I guess anything's a possibility, but if Fulton County gives us, or gives our techs a number
Right.
for Dominion, I would
And
assume,
they can fix it over the phone.
right, they fixed it right there. I can,
I
think
got,
That's all our questions here from Ms. Voyles. Thank you, ma'am, for being here today. We appreciate your time.
thanks
And
for having us.
We'll move on to,
Could I take one point of personal privilege
Yes,
for a
ma'am.
minute? One of my concerns over the years has been how many laws have been set concerning our voting system, and I take this very, very seriously. And so when the new secretary was in, I went into the office and I did speak with Sam Teasley, and I said, how many people in here have ever worked a polling location to see beyond theory, have seen the actual practice? And I do have to compliment Sam Teasley out of that office for taking me up, and he worked, his wife worked, and his daughter worked so they could compare notes. And I really appreciate when people will do that, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we were going to move on to Ms. Bridget Throne. Bridget Throne. she's out there.